problem.
Yes.
So,
I think that's something also really important to think about is like what's happened with this can easily be something that happens with marijuana. Like if it is legalized, like that's very close to happening. And like how is creating a culture around addiction going to affect us? I mean, we don't know, but it's definitely something to think about.
I know in Australia, heroin use was very popular, but then there was an abrupt shortage and their death rate went down a ton. So when it wasn't available, people would die. So kind of like what you were saying.
Yeah.
That's just like proven.
Yeah, and there's an industry around this. So in China, they produce most of the fentanyl that we consume in America. And in Mexico and countries down south, they produce most of the heroin that we consume and many other opioid-based drugs. And so I think that maybe making a stricter system of coming into the country or bringing these drugs in, they're already using laser spectrometry to look at the luggage and stuff at this point, but maybe just having a tighter grasp on finding these drugs before they come to the country.
Yeah, and I know the United States, for example, has provided Mexico with nearly $3 billion in counter narcotics aid, Colombia with $10 billion, and they're trying to help China out with the fentanyl issue. And they've also put a lot more officers at the border to try and stop these cartels from coming in with all of these drugs. So, I mean, the U.S. is trying to help the problem in, not only domestically, but internationally. It's just so bad right now.
Yeah.
So are there other methods of controlling pain, say post-surgery?
I saw things about physical therapy. I don't know how effective that is, but
Yeah, there are some, and that's what a lot of these organizations that are trying to help, like mainly the bigger ones like the CDC, like they're putting a lot of money towards research just to find, and like what you were talking about with Donald Trump, same thing, like they're just trying to put a lot of money towards research and finding non-addictive substances that can control pain just as effectively. Because opioids do a great job of controlling pain, almost too good of a job, because people get addicted to it and can't stop that, so.
Yeah, in general, I don't think that opioids should be the first thing to be prescribed to someone. Maybe starting with ibuprofen or Advil, the lower level pain, and as painkillers, if they need more, we prescribe more. But maybe more localized things for pain killing instead of just like an all-around brain to body euphoric like effect. So I don't think that is the best thing to be doing. But I've not done a ton of research on the effectiveness on other drugs as opioids.
Well, it's kind of reminiscent of, 100 years ago we prescribed cocaine, and then that became a problem. Now we regulate cocaine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you foresee this as something that we regulate as an illegal substance in the future?
Yeah.
I would predict so.
Yeah. Something that I did find was that there was success in when the CDC regulated the milligram morphine equivalent, which is like just how much you can prescribe per patient. In 2011 and 2012, they did that in Ohio and Kentucky, and they saw it was at 85%. So the morphine equivalent was 85% per capita, and then it decreased to 62% per capita, which that was just from improving their drug monitoring programs. And that's kind of something that they're like huge on focusing. Is like we need to focus on the monitoring. So like that's from the communication between the doctor and the pharmacy and the patient. Just nothing getting lost in communication there, because that happens all the time. Like a prescription can get lost, or they can somehow say like, oh, that wasn't supposed to be canceled, and continue getting their prescription, and nobody remembers to cancel it. So there is just free-flowing prescriptions that there's no account for. So that's something that definitely needs to be improved, is the monitoring.
I would say something else to be improved. This is just in general, but making opioids not a cool thing for kids to do, or taking it out of the media completely. So I feel like that having music about it, having it on TV shows, having it seen as like mainstream is having more kids go to it. And if we can remove these from the media, hopefully it'll make these drugs seem more realistic and not as ideal.
or not even like that, but just removing the stigma, because like what you said, there's a positive stigma around doing drugs and stuff like that, but if we show people like what actually happens, that'll just translate into the media and the things that we're publishing on social media, etc. So
What would you guys say to maybe a patient that has a chronic pain issue? prescribe this medication and you're taking it. There don't seem to be any signs of addiction. Maybe there's not anybody in the house that's abusing it and things like that. How should we respond, or how would you respond maybe to a person's concerned that you want to take their drugs away or something?
My mom actually told me about one of her patients recently that happened to, and the way she described it was like, it was an little old lady. She's been taking it for years, and my mom's not her primary care, but her primary care doctor tried to take her off it. And she came to my mom and said, I'm just in so much pain, like this and that. And she was like, I mean, we can't just take you off of it after you've been on it for all these years. You're obviously not abusing it. You obviously need it. And so that is very hard for the patients that do need it. And I think, again, that's up to the doctor's discretion of are they abusing it? Is this a healthy dose? Do they need it? Because it is a helpful medicine. I don't know if it should be eradicated completely, but I think that is very hard, and the best solution would just to be monitor, see if they're abusing it. If not, see what the best plan is from there. But also, going forward, try not to put people on it. I don't know if you guys believe this. Yeah, that's what it is.
So why is this such a problem in our area of the country?
Well, kind of like what I just talked about, Kentucky is one of the top 10 worst states for 3 main reasons: the overprescription, location, and just like the socioeconomic issues. I think I have some statistics about it, but it's right here. Okay. Well, I don't need it. Okay. It's just really bad for those 3 reasons. Like I mentioned before, it's just really hard for ambulances and stuff to get to these rural areas, and also the poverty plays a big role. You see a lot more impoverished areas with a lot of citizens being addicted to these opioids because when there's no hope, that's their resort. And yeah, it's just really bad. But Kentucky does have some good resources, I will say. They have Voices of Hope, which is a program and call center in Kentucky that offers legal services for people that need it and are recovering from these. They have job opportunities. What else? And dental, healthcare. So they're helping out. And also, I don't know if you guys know about DB8 Kitchen. That's a local restaurant, but I read a lot about it this summer. They only employ recovering addicts, and so it's a breakfast and lunch place, and so that way people have a chance of having a job and kind of making their way back into society, and then they can go to their meetings at night and kind of just I think it's just important to show people that there is hope after something so drastic happens. But I think that's one of the issues with Kentucky right now is people don't see that hope, and so I think it's cool that we are working on programs and stuff like that to promote it, but it's just not quite there yet.
And right now, the opioid death rate in Kentucky is double the national average, which is, the one in Kentucky is 27.9, and the United States has an adjusted rate of 14.9.
And then along with what Kate was saying about the poverty, I think that's a really good point, is that something that goes with poverty and with addiction is that there's no hope. You feel like you can't get out of it. And I think that an addiction is something that people tend to lean on. And so, just with that, think about someone who goes through an overdose. Ms. Kett sent us a TED Talk to watch, and it really opened my eyes to just the true situation of what happens. So someone is overdosing, they're embarrassed, they're probably broke from buying all this. They end up in the hospital, and they're either arrested or they're sent out immediately back into the world, and they have nothing. And so what do they go back to is their drugs that they were leaning so heavily on before. And that's why we also feel that rehab is very important, because when these people do end up in the hospital, they're already at rock bottom, and you're just sending them right back to where they were. And so we feel that they should go into a rehab program, or something like DB8, something like that, that puts them not at an advantage, but better than they were before after such a terrible event has happened. Yes.
Also, to go with the embarrassment thing, a lot of people don't seek help because of they're embarrassed. So one thing that Kentucky has is Casey's Law, and it was passed in 2004, but it basically provides a means of intervening with someone who is unable to recognize his or her need for treatment. But it showed that involuntary treatment can be just as successful as voluntary treatment in cases like this. So I just thought that was pretty interesting that we had that.
And then there's also something I read about called Good Samaritan laws, which protects people who are the victim of an overdose and then people who are helping them, both from like prosecution for drug possession charges. And I mean, that could be controversial, but I think that that goes along with our idea that rehab, instead of punishing and condemning, will, in the long run, help everyone the best.
Y'all look at statistics like related to our school compared to other schools in the town, how many opioid deaths we've had in
No,
recent
I know
years?
it's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of LCA students that have overdosed in the past couple of years. But that just kind of feeds into the idea that it happens to anyone. And so that's why it's such a big issue right now. It's not just affecting a certain group of people, it's affecting everyone.
Our governor made a comment that we are becoming soft. It wasn't tactfully received very well. But there may be some truth to it in the fact that maybe we are becoming soft and we are becoming more dependent upon pain meds and things like that. So how can we get a new generation of making tougher students so that they're tougher adults and not as weak when it comes to pain tolerance?
Yeah, I think with students, it's not that students are getting addicted because they have been prescribed the painkillers themselves. It's like what I said before, like they're getting addicted to drugs at a young age because they don't know the repercussions. They're buying them from their friends, etc. So going back to what we keep saying, I think it's just we need to educate students on these repercussions and what's going on, and that'll kind of toughen them up.
I would say education as well, making sure that no one in Kentucky should not understand the effects of opioids and how they affect your brain and how they affect your well-being. So I think that because people don't know how these drugs actually affect themselves, they're just feeling the euphoric effect and the elation that comes from it. They're not really experiencing they don't really know what's going to happen down the line. So I think that educating them in that sense with the science, but also teaching them how to, say no and to leave the situation if it doesn't seem safe. And common sense things that we need to keep implementing to make us less soft.
I taught health and PE. I've taught a lot of health classes on drugs. Never once have I been sitting in that class and felt a euphoric feeling from the education I received about the drug education. I've participated and taught a lot of PE classes, movement, hiking, canoeing, badminton, you name it, we've taught it. I've played it, etc. I've come out of those feeling euphoric, naturally euphoric. So should we take more of that slant and just get our society, not just young people, but adults too, getting them moving, active, and say, hey, you may become tougher, but you also may experience a positive euphoric feeling that's not drug related.
Yeah, I think that educating people on different ways to make themselves feel better and to give themselves like a positive reward for doing good things instead of looking towards these drugs. However, you do see a lot of people who are into sports. They are exercising all the time, but they still are the ones getting addicted to drugs, dying at higher rates than most people. So I would say that just in general, finding anything, like encouraging people to be passionate about things they're passionate about and to want to do things that make them feel good instead of feeling they need to go to drugs to do the same thing. Would probably be my advice to anyone who's dealing with this.
And I think if you're talking about students also, it's almost a different dynamic, I would feel. Like, it can be different with different people, but some people may start it because they don't want to feel pain from something such as depression or another mental illness. Or some people may start it because their friend hands them a pill and says, take this, it will make you feel good. And I think that's just something that we need to understand, is that people start it for a different reason, but it can't happen to anyone.
So you talked about educating before this happens, but what happens once they're in it? What's the best treatment? Is it, medical therapy, rehab, work programs, incarceration?
I would recommend medicine-assisted treatment, which is when you have a medication such as buprenorphine or methadone, if they're less likely to be addicted to that, coupled with therapy and treatment centers with other people who are going through the same thing. Sometimes numbers are empowering, and knowing how many other people are dealing with something can make you feel more able to overcome it. So I think that prescribing these medications is the first step, because relieving that natural need to get something like an opioid is the first big obstacle. Then after that, getting them put into a community where they're not tempted anymore would probably be the best solution.
I also know that instead of just putting these people into jail, which is what we've kind of done in the past, starting with George H.W. Bush, this idea is becoming more and more popular, but drug courts, so instead of sending people right to prison for these nonviolent crimes, they're going into rehabilitation, and it's proven to work a lot better than just sending them right to the jail cell. And so I think things like community service and stuff like that, if people do get caught with these crimes or going through something like that, would be effective. But like Peyton said, if it's addiction, then just going to rehab and being with people who are going through the same thing, because it's important to know you're not alone in what you're going through, and I think that's it.
Yeah. And I'd say the same thing, just like what I said earlier, you can't just send people back right to where they were. You want to help them get to a better place. And so I hesitate to say mandatory, but I think strongly encouraged rehab, like upon the event of an overdose, should be like important to, I guess, their recovery, and like things like DVA, like helping them get jobs, helping them realize that that's not where they're stuck. And of course there's going to be people who are not like receptive, but especially with the event of like opioid overdoses, it a lot of times has been something that's been building up over time, and they literally are rock bottom. So they need help.
Wait, this is a little bit different. Can you comment on the more recent hepatitis C outbreak, and if there's any connection to this issue?
Yeah, I did research. Did you guys
I
research
have
that?
found a little something about that.
I know there's about needles, and I know there something that people push for is needle exchange programs, which is just to give heroin addicts fresh needles if they need them. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm all for like helping these people and like looking out for their health, but I think that's pretty outright enabling tactic. You guys may disagree.
Yeah, no, there was no specific statistic I found, but in an article I read, it said that it's having the devastating consequences on public health, causing high rates of hepatitis C, HIV, and other diseases because of the shared syringes. And so I think it's just another contributing factor to those issues.
Yeah, it's definitely confounding variables. I would say that in general, these communities that are more likely to be overdosing on opioids or doing heroin or everything that they're participating in might also cause for them to be more likely to be victims of these diseases.
Said that poverty plus no hope equals addiction, right? Something to that effect. Where does faith come into it? Where does our faith get to be inserted to help these situations?
Are you saying in the victim or like in helping people?
Both. Victim who's coming out of an opioid addiction or preventing it, going into it. Where does faith play a factor? You all get to hear about faith every day. How does it help?
I think something that is a huge issue with this is love versus tolerance. Like, where does it come, I guess, to a head of like, should we send them straight to jail because they had drugs, or should we help them become better people, or should we leave them on the side of the road because they did this to themselves? And one verse that we cited was Matthew 25:40, which says, "The king will reply, 'Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me.'" And I think that's just something important to remember. A lot of the things that Jesus said were helping those who were ill, and addiction is an illness. So we should help people through these tough times of their life.
I would also say my favorite book of the Bible is Proverbs. And one of my favorite Proverbs says, "How much better to get wisdom than gold, to get insight rather than silver." And I would say this message encourages us to educate people around us and to teach the value of knowledge and to not overlook the people who have not been educated, but to use our education to help them. So I think that in my shoes, if I see someone going through this, or I find myself in a situation where I need to help someone overcome this, I can maybe educate them and get more help.
I would agree with both of them.
So as we close, what's the most surprising thing that you found out in your research?
I mean, just how much it affects everyone. Like, when I first started learning about this topic, I thought it only affected like a certain socioeconomic group, and then when all of the deaths at MCA started happening and stuff, I'm like, what's going on? And so once we did the more research and everything, it clearly, like, it can happen to anyone. And so I think that's what surprised me the most, is how can we, like, trying to figure out how can we stop this, because it is affecting so many people. So, I don't know, that's just kind of, it was just surprising to me how many people it truly does affect.
I was surprised that I've never heard a lot about this before I started researching.